Hey there, today I'd like to share with you a very interesting endgame study which is called the Saavedra position. This position is named after a Spanish priest called Fernando Saavedra, and here we get the position, and it is white to play and win. And what I like about this study, first of all, it features a lot of ending ideas like under promotion, perpetual check, stalemate, but it is also a very realistic position, the one that we get in front, because these positions on which we have rooks and pawns are very common in endings. So this position might perfectly look like a position from a real game. So this study has a lot of practical value. Some studies might be very nice, but they might be created from positions that will pretty much never occur in your games. Those studies might be interesting to practice your creativity, but the position that you have in front, you may actually get it in a game, or you might get very similar positions to this study. So let's first of all take a look at the position. White is trying to promote this pawn. And what I like about studies whenever I don't have a clear idea is to imagine what would happen if the other side would play. So here it is white to play, but let's imagine that black can play here. Black could simply stop this pawn if black wanted, for example with the move rook to d6. Here black is pinning the c-pawn, and black can give the rook for the pawn. So if black was to play, black could easily draw this position. That's why if white has to win this position, white has to promote the c-pawn in some way. And here by process of elimination we can easily find the first move, which is the move c7, because the king has to guard the c5 square. For example, if the king goes to b7, then after rook to c5, black is easily stopping this pawn. So this is going to be an easy draw. Black cannot win this position because black's king is far away, so black has to give the rook for the pawn. So c7 is very logical, and now black seems to have a lot of problems to stop this pawn. One of the key points of this study is that the rook is on a file which is adjacent to the pawn. So here the rook is on the d file and the pawn is on the c file. If the rook was on another file, for example on the f file, then the rook would come to the 8th rank and simply stop the promotion of the pawn. But in this case, rook to d8 is not possible because the square is covered by the pawn. So now black has to find very accurate moves in order to complicate the game. Otherwise, white will simply promote the pawn. For example, if rook to d1, then white promotes, and this ending, a king and a queen against a king and a rook, is winning for the stronger side, for white in this case. Although this is a complicated ending, this position is winning for white. But as we'll see, even though the position looks very simple, there's a lot of tricks that both sides have. So here the move rook to d6 is the first interesting move that black has. And basically white will always have to cover black's invasion on the c file. So here the king has to move and cover the c6 square. So if the king goes to a7, for example, after rook to c6, then that's going to be a draw. But if the king goes to b7, even though it covers c6, then after rook to d7, now black is pinning the pawn, and black will give the rook for the pawn and draw the game. So king to b7 is not the correct move, but the king here has to stay on the b file and not on the c file, because after king to c5, then here black has this very nice resource of rook to d1. Rook to d2 is also possible. The idea is to give a check on the c file and try to capture the pawn. Here white also has to be careful. Promoting would even lose the game. After rook to c1, we give a check, and after the king moves, we just capture. But after rook to d1, white can play king to b6, for example, but after rook to c1, black is managing to stop the pawn. That's why the only remaining move to cover the c6 square is to go king to b5. And now we get a very similar situation on which black seems unable to stop the pawn, but black can still try this idea of giving checks by playing rook to d5. Again, if we go king to c4, then black goes rook to d1. Going to b6 wouldn't make any progress. That's why we need to continue down the road and go to b4. And again, black will try to play rook to d4, giving checks. And here white plays king to b3. And as we'll see, white is bringing the king closer to black's king. which is going to be a very important point in this study. And now again black has to try to give checks, otherwise white will promote the pawn. And after rook to d3, here white has king to c2, and now black doesn't have this idea of bringing the rook to the c file, because now the king is covering d1. So this seems like the game is now over because white is attacking the rook and planning to promote. But here black still has a very beautiful resource, but white also has a very nice refutation to that resource. Here black can try to play the move rook to d4, which allows white to promote. But the point is that if white promotes to a queen, here black has a very nice rook to c4, giving a check and attacking the queen. That's why white has to capture on c4. And now we see a drawback of having the king closer to black's king, which is that black can reach a stalemate position. So here black doesn't have any move, and the game would end in a draw. And here playing king to c3 would allow black to play rook to d1, and after king to c2, rook to d4, white is not making progress. White cannot under-promote to a bishop or a knight because after rook to c4, this would fork the two pieces and black would even win the game. But white has this very nice under-promotion to a rook. And here the position might seem like a very equal position because we have a rook and a king on each side. But now we see that white has a very serious threat of rook to a8, giving a checkmate. And the only way to deal with that threat is to go rook to a4. Now here rook to c4 is not a stalemate because now the king can go to a2. So black has to play rook to a4, and now it might seem like the game ends in a draw, but again white has this very nice idea of king to b3, now attacking the rook and planning to give a checkmate, and now there's no way for black to meet these threats, and the game is over. So here black can play king to b1, stopping the checkmate, but after king takes, white is just winning the game. So I don't suggest that you memorize all these moves, but I think it's quite interesting to know this maneuver with the king whenever the king is supporting the pawn. So here after c7 and rook to d6, this idea of coming with the king all the way back so that the defending side will run out of checks. So this is probably one of the key ideas of this study that you can keep in mind when you have similar positions. In any case, whenever you play a game, you need to double check all these over the chessboard. And let's see how very strong players use these ideas in their games. Here we have a position that might look completely different, but as we see, white manages to reach a very similar position with this pass pawn on f6. So here white is a pawn down, but black has very bad pawns. Black has double pawns on the A and C file. White has this very strong pass pawn on f6, but black is planning to play rook to f5. So this position is not trivial. For example, after f7, rook to f5, black's idea is to hold this pawn and then bring the king. So this would not be very convincing for white. That's why here white played the move rook to e5, planning to trade rooks. If black trades rooks, then this pawn ending, even though black is a pawn up, is really bad because this pawn is just very strong and black's pawns are very weak. For example, after king to d7, to stop this pawn, white can play king to d5, and now white is just either supporting the pass pawn if black moves the king or just capturing pawns. So this is just a trivial win for white. But taking on h4 makes more sense because black even gives a check. But on the other hand, white's idea is to go king to g5, activating the king, which is a very important principle in the ending, and the king will support the pass pawn. For example, here after rook to h1, white can simply go f7, and after rook to f1, king takes. This pawn is gonna cost black a rook, and white is just going to win very easily. That's why black played the move rook to h5. Now that black got a pawn, and now black also has this pass pawn on the g file, it makes sense to go rook to h5. So going for the pawn ending here would even be bad for white, because black also has this pass pawn. For example, after rook takes and king takes, king to d7, black will manage to stop the f pawn, and now white doesn't have this pawn on h4 to stop black's pawn on g6. But white's idea was to go for this Saavedra type of position by playing king takes g6, just giving the rook for a pawn. So after rook takes, here white is a rook and a pawn down, but white is even winning the game. Because after f7 we get this well-known position on which the rook is on a file which is adjacent to the pawn. If the rook was on d5 for example, this would be very bad for white. But now black has problems stopping this pawn. And black tried this idea of giving checks, but white, who is a very strong player, most likely knew this maneuver and played king to g5 with the idea to bring the king all the way down and then promote the pawn. So the game continued rook to e5, king to g4, rook to e4, king to g3, and after rook to e3, king to f2. Now black is running out of checks and the game is going to be over. We have some pawns on the queen side, but since white still has some pawns, black will not manage to have a fortress, which might happen in some positions with a rook and one or more pawns against the queen. But here white still has pawns after white promotes the f-pawn, and black's pawns are also fairly weak. So even though black complicated the game a little bit, white still won the game quite convincingly. So keep in mind this important idea of a king supporting a pawn against a rook, because you might get very similar positions in your games.